A psychologist once asked the young David Bryce Jones during a job interview process, what was the happiest day of your life? To which he responded that, well, for him, sunshine and clouds went together. In other words, there was for him no happiest day that he was going to isolate from all others. From which we may gather that Mr. Bryce Jones was not the sort who's going to happy talk you to death about his happiest day at Niagara Falls when he stood there with his honey in their matching vacation outfits. And so, not a happy talk, happy day kind of guy, Mr. Bryce Jones was disinclined to rate one day as happier than the rest, which was, in my estimate, a rather mature answer on this young man's part, for he'd already discovered in his life that sunshine and clouds go together. He'd already discovered that meaning comes from the mix and the mystery of things, like there's a complexity to it. Already fledged, Mr. Bryce Jones had no wish to play in some kind of happiness ratings game with this pseudo-psychologist. But of course, by not happily talking about his happiest day, he was in effect pouring scorn upon the therapist's question. By refusing to go along with her question, which we may presume was on a questionnaire form, the young man was not getting with her program, was not responding in her terms, was not just acquiescing and complying with what was expected of him. For his experience of life had already had in it a richness of ambiguity and mystery, and he did not want to be measured on the basis of that question for his fitness for the job. Now, this response of his may have, you could just imagine the look of disapproval on the therapist's face, and yet perhaps more than likely would not necessarily have been an overtly disapproving look, but rather there could well have been like a poker face. That's what happens in that kind of situation. There'll be like a poker face, which is like the pretense of objectivity. But you can feel, if you've been in that kind of situation, that behind the expressionless face, you can be sure that the wrath of judgment is upon you. It's like the kind of unreal encounter, like in that sort of situation, where the interviewer spends more time taking notes than actually looking at you. Well, I think that this is what the young David Bryce Jones was up against, and he chose to respond, I'm happy to say, with integrity, rather than with any effort to please or to impress the interviewer. Nevertheless, the psychologist persisted, we may presume, going down the questions on her form. She ignored the young man's comment about sunshine and clouds going together, and without skipping a beat, then asked the next question on the form, what has been your unhappiest day? To which Mr. Bryce Jones then gave the cheeky response that he'd already answered the question. Well, I trust too that in that kind of situation that I would not go along with a question about my happiest day. What's your happiest day? For I've understood as well that sunshine and clouds go together, which is true, for example, like of great music. Like in great music, there's the mix and mystery of many differing elements combining and this enormous complexity that is there. Another parallel is like of Socratic dialogue, where in the nature of a true encounter, a real encounter, and you can think of this as like what can happen in a great friendship when you're pursuing something, that together there'd be a level of inspiration, but at the same time, there can be like a searing struggle of conscience. Like there are a number of elements that go together. But it's amazing, actually, how many people feel that conversation, the dialogue, is about happy talk, peppy talk, and taking turns telling happy stories, funny stories. For example, I once heard a priest say, who should have known better, that he felt that he was required to be some kind of cheerleader at the bedside of a patient in a hospital. Aren't you supposed to encourage the patient? He naively asked me. No, I replied, you're there to create enough space for reality to break in. While the glee club swarms the patient's room with happy talk, peppy talk, funny stories, your task is to break past all of that, break through all of that as a reality creating presence. Like that's your role. And thus it is that I care less about happiness, happy stories, your happiest event, etc. I care more about meaning, not so much mere happiness. Meaning trumps happiness every time. But I'm in a culture which is caught up in the pursuit, not so much of the pursuit of meaning, but of happiness. It's as if we're all being perpetually interviewed, and found wanting by the happy people. I mean, the happy people, they're like a plague upon the planet, and they're patrolling the streets everywhere. And my struggle, and perhaps yours too, is how is it that you and I are going to maintain integrity against these happiness pushers, against the superficiality specialists? I mean, how are we going to resist caving in to their commandment, their order to be happy? How do we maintain ourselves against the happy people who want to squeeze us into their happiness projects? Dear Lord, I pray, save us from the happy people. Lord, help us rather to be, and here I'm deadly serious, help us to be rather to be heroes on another level entirely. And I've got a quote to share. It's a powerful quote. It's from Henri Turcot, who says, "There is a heroism in acting without any other sanction than the intoxication of moving in the direction which is truly one's own." That's not so much about happiness. That's about meaning. The intoxication of moving in the direction which is truly one's own. He says that he was given these words when he was a teenager, and he's never forgotten them. And he says they resound in me more and more like a call to free me from, in particular, the childish fascination with results, with progress accumulated like a possession. So he's saying that we come to life to the degree that we are moving in the direction which is truly one's own. We come to life to the degree that we're moving in the direction which is truly one's own. In other words, finding meaning in your life. Nothing else will do but that. Nothing else is going to satisfy except that, and especially not mere happiness.